While the hurricane season might be over, there is still time to reflect on what was a season that exceeded a lot of expectations in a deep playoff run. Going to give some overall thoughts, talk about the trade deadline and the playoffs, and who were my top three Canes performers for the regular season and in the playoffs. All of that and more on a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes.
You're Locked on Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Thank you to the everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers, also the co-host of the Searchcast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked on Hurricanes. Got a Friday edition of the pod as we get to kind of reflect and recap basically just overall thoughts on the 24-25 season for your Hurricanes. Just, how this team basically exceeded a lot of expectations, had to navigate through a lot of, big changes as the season went along. And of course, we'll definitely have a whole segment talking about the trades that happened in January and in March that kind of led to the playoffs, and then just give overall thoughts on the playoffs as a whole. And then later on, like I said at the start of the show, going to go over who I think were the top three Canes performers overall in the season. That's including regular and in the playoffs. So to start off the show, wow, where to begin? Honestly, just looking at the season as a whole for the Hurricanes. I mean, you look at a team that, like I said, exceeded a lot of expectations that people thought, you going in, some people thought it was going to be a step back year. It was going to be a transition year for the Hurricanes. I mean, you lose Steph Nason, Brady Shea, Brett Pesce. You lose five or six, Teuvo Teravainen. You lose about 5 or 6 guys out of your main roster that you had for a good number of seasons, and that's a lot of turnover. You got a whole defensive pair gone. One of your key guys you had on the bottom six a lot, but also played a lot of penalty minutes for his, being able to put his body in front of the goal and stuff like that. Teuvo Teravainen was with the Hurricanes for a very long time. Just be able to acquire him from Chicago and all that. Of course, you get Brady Shea back in 2020. They got him in, Vincent Trocheck. Brett Pesce was drafted by the Hurricanes, was basically a Hurricane for a long time before, all of them left for free agency. And, they got their money. Can't blame them for that. And of course, you get Jack Roslovic, you get, Eric Robinson, William Carrier. You get some guys on this roster, but how, Shane Gostisbehere, Sean Walker, but how is this team going to be? And like I said, a lot of expectations were maybe wild card, maybe third in the Metro Division. You kind of squeak your way into that spot. There were some people even saying that the Hurricanes, might miss the playoffs entirely. And as we heard from Rod Brind'Amour in the post game, following Game 5 on Wednesday night, he even said that, going into camp and stuff, he didn't know how this team was going to be. And he thought, maybe there is a chance we might miss. So, but he's, definitely proud of the team for what they've done. And there's a lot to be proud of. I mean, the Carolina Hurricanes, in a year where a lot of people thought there was going to be a transition, where they were going to fall short of a lot of expectations, they finished with the 10th best record, or in terms of points, in the entire NHL. They finished with 99. First time in a little while that they did not get 100 points. Of course, they lost the last 3 games of the regular season. Of course, they went 3-6-1 in their last 10 to get there. But I mean, it's one of those things where guys are resting up. They want to have everyone ready for the playoffs. And it was a smart move because up until the conference final, they were one of the healthiest teams in the playoffs. But 47, 30, and 5 for 99 points on the season, 266 goals for, 233 against for a plus 33 overall. And the one thing that really stood out was their home record, 31-9-1, which their 31 wins tied the LA Kings, who went 31-6-4 at home. But 31-9-1, the Hurricanes had a really good regular season at home. On the road, there was a chance very late they could have gotten 500, but they finished 16-21-4 on the road, but still got the number 10 team overall in terms of the entire league. But they did get the number 4 seed in the East behind Washington, Toronto, and Tampa. And they were one of them in Florida, who finished 4-5 in the conference, were the teams that made it to the conference final. But just overall, I mean, it goes to show that for a Rod Brind'Amour team where people thought that, like I said, that they were going to have a drop-off year where they might miss the playoffs or, not even sniff where they're at 99 points or, low 90s, maybe upper 80s. Who really knows? But, then you get career years out of, Jack Roslovic ties his goal total from, a few seasons ago is with Columbus. Eric Robinson had a career year across the board. He was one of those big guys down there at the bottom 6 for depths. Jackson Blake, rookie season, 17 goals, 34 points. He was the Hobey Baker finalist last year in North Dakota, but you didn't know how he was going to be in his rookie year. And then, you get Seth Jarvis, tying his point total from last year. And that's with him missing 7 games due to re-aggravating his shoulder, but set a new assist career high for himself with 35. Led the team in goals with 32. Sebastian Aho led the way, as once again, no surprise there. Shane Gostisbehere led the defense in points, which you really wanted out of a guy like him. Jacob Slavin, what more can you say about this guy? Got his flowers at the Four Nations. Had a really good season. Once again, had 8 penalty minutes for the 3rd year in a row. Unfortunately, no individual award nominations for him, which is kind of it's still crazy to think that Jacob Slavin is still being underrated, even though he got a lot of his flowers at Four Nations and most recently in the playoffs. But for me, looking at this team, how can you not be proud of the Hurricanes for what they did? Yeah, the playoffs, the conference final didn't go the way that you wanted, but just for them to get there with the expectations, with the are they going to do it? Okay, if they get it, but how far are they going to get? And they get in. Some people randomly thought that the Devils are going to beat the Hurricanes, even though they had a bunch of guys out. Then you go into round 2. Once again, I think 6 people might have picked the Hurricanes out of ESPN to make it there. And they did. They made the Eastern Conference final, and they won an Eastern Conference final game for the first time, since 2006. And good thing that narrative is now going to die down. But you can't be any more proud. Like, you got to be so proud of this team. I know I'm proud of this team. Of course, I'm someone who's always optimistic about the Hurricanes, but looking at the roster, yeah, maybe was it a little bit of a step down? Yeah. But everyone knew it was going to be a step back transition year. But you didn't know where the Hurricanes were going to finish. But then they go out and were the 10th best team in the NHL in terms of points. They were the 4th best Eastern Conference team. There was a point that they were fighting for the 2 seed with Toronto before they rested a lot of their guys. But overall, what a season for these guys. And that's what bringing a lot of new faces in to try to figure out this roster and figure out roles and who's going to do what. And just, even with, a tough stretch in November, December, even February was a rough stretch. I don't even really look at the back half of April because you're resting guys at that point. Like, what can you do there? But you look at a team that went through, longer stretches of kind of weird, hopefully this skid kind of ends type of hockey. And then you go look at January, they pop off for 10 wins. March, they get 11 for the back-to-back seasons that they've done that. So there was a lot of great hockey involved. I mean, they started the season, 14-4 to start the year with an 8-game winning streak. Like, I don't think anyone really saw that run coming that early, especially during the, state fair trip. But overall, just to see where this team is at, and now you're looking at the offseason, which we'll talk about more next week, starting to look into that a little bit more. But you're looking at a team who, when a retool year, made a conference final are now going to have almost $30 million in cap space and a lot of draft capital. I would be safe to say that the Hurricanes are going to be loading up potentially this offseason. And after a season they just had, and with the cap going up and how much space they're going to have, yeah, this is a season where you're like, okay, exceeded expectations with a roster that, maybe wasn't the best one that the Hurricanes have had in the last few years, but now you get to potentially load up that roster with a lot of moves this offseason. It gives you a lot of confidence going into 25-26 that this 24-25 team potentially just sets you up for a huge next season, maybe even for next seasons after that. Now, speaking of all that, what kind of went into, the Hurricanes making this deep playoff run? Well, we're going to talk about the trades, and we're going to talk about the playoffs overall here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, when it comes to tracking stuff like that, which players are showing up in the bigger moments, how could tracking their trends help you build your next bet? Well, that's a good thing about FanDuel. They are able to track that for you and give you the best type of odds and work it up into same-game parlays. So if you're new to FanDuel, well, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get an extra $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, we talked about the season kind of overall, just, kind of given the thoughts of, it's a season that no one really thought was going to be as successful as it was, overall with the regular season, how far they went into the playoffs. But going into the playoffs, what kind of really helped this team get there more so than anything else? And I think one of the main contributors when you kind of look at that too is there was a lot of changes on this roster. I mean, not a ton where it's like, half the team is getting traded or anything crazy like that, but you get some additions where you're kind of like, very interesting of how this played out. And I will say that when you look at the trades, so go back to January, Hurricanes are having a great month. Teams kind of, changing the course of what happened in the back half of November going into Thanksgiving. December wasn't the greatest. They finished 6-1. But January, they're on a hot run. They're getting a lot better as the month goes on. And then out of nowhere on a Friday night, while they're on their, New York Metro trip up that way, they go and make a blockbuster way before the trade deadline for, that's the trade where you see, Martin Nietzsche and Jack Drury go over to the Colorado Avalanche for Mikko Rantanen. And, of course, they also get Taylor Hall back from the Chicago Blackhawks. And, of course, there's some draft picks that get moved around and stuff like that. And at that point, you're kind of thinking, whoa, okay, the Hurricanes just got a superstar, and you get a former MVP in Taylor Hall. But, of course, at the time, the big name was Mikko Rantanen. You go through, the Four Nations break, you kind of come out of that and say, okay, we got some, luckily the Hurricanes did this at the right time. If you have to look at some silver linings, that you kind of did it where you had a lot of time to figure it out if you want to try and make something work with them. And then, as the weeks went on, you get close to the deadline, you're kind of like, he's like Rantanen's okay, but not really playing as you would hope. But then you see Taylor Hall kind of, doing his thing for the Hurricanes. And then with Carolina, Taylor Hall in the regular season, how about for the fact that, he did play 31 games, but he had 9 goals, 18 assists. He was a +1, had 4 power play goals and 6 power play points, and had a 14.5 shooting percentage, and while averaging almost 15.5 minutes per game. That was kind of huge for the Canes at the time, because that's something that really helped them out with the fact that with Mikko kind of playing okay, you kind of had Taylor Hall kind of stepping up in a big way, and it seemed like it was just gelling well with the system. And then come to find out, a lot of noise was being surrounded by Miko Rantanen, and of course the whole with that of the Hurricanes might shop him around, and people were like, oh, it's just that's probably not a thing. It's just smoke and mirrors. But in the end, it happened. Hurricanes trade Mikko Rantanen in a span of just a few weeks, and he goes to the Dallas Stars. Come to find out, he didn't really want to stay in Carolina. So instead of the Hurricanes forcing the hand just to see how the playoff run would go, they be like, oh, we got to get something back out of it. We're not going to let this guy walk at the end of the season. So you had to do what was best for the team because you got rid of Martin Necas and Jack Drury and some picks. So you get another big trade. And this time you get Logan Stankoven from the Stars, and you get 2 firsts and 2 fourths. Not really bad, all things considered. The fact that you just picked up a lot of draft capital, of course, if the trade happened a lot sooner, the Hurricanes might have flipped a first to get other guys like maybe your Brock Besser. But overall, though, with the limited time you had, at least you got something out of it. You got, like I said, you got 4 draft picks, 2 of them in the first round. You got 2/3, but you also picked up Logan Stankoven, who 22 years old, another young guy, but he's a guy who's only 5'8", but he plays a lot bigger than 5'8". He's basically Seth Jarvis, but a little bit shorter. Just constant motor. He's basically a pit bull. He's just a puck hound. He just is after puck the whole time. He's the quintessential Carolina Hurricane that Rod Brind'Amour and the Hurricanes want in a system, and that's the guy that they have here. So you're looking at March 7th, the trade deadline. They pick him up. In 19 games, he had 5 goals, 9 points. He did have a power play goal and 2 power play points, averaged just a little bit over 15 minutes per game, did have a 10.9 shooting percentage. And you're like, okay, that's not bad, because now you got him as an RFA for next season for 25-26 before you give him a contract. And that's not even talking for the fact that you got Seth Jarvis just finished his first year of his new deal. Sebastian Aho is in the very early stages of his deal, same with Andrei Svechnikov. And then you look at, Jacob Slavin's his new contract at 6.4 kicks in next year, and you still got 4 more years of Walker, 2 more years of Gostisbehere. And then you add Logan Stankoven to this, where he's still on his ELC with 1 year left next year. The Hurricanes are going to extend him. And from all intents and purposes, it looks like Stankoven loves being in Carolina. So that's a big deal. So you get him out of it, out of that whole Mikko Rantanen thing. And then, as we're in the playoffs, Taylor Hall gets his extension for 3 more years at 3.1, which is a great deal, honestly. And that kicks in next year. And they get a former MVP who won the state in Carolina because of Rod Brind'Amour and just the locker room. And then, that's great. You love to see it. And that's something that you really want if you're the Carolina Hurricanes. And now you add 2 guys to this lineup that really want to be here and they could produce next season. And then a late addition after the trade deadline, and even this guy even talked about himself, he was even surprised. But Mark Jankowski, late, pick up after the deadline, he comes in, absolutely goes on a heater for the Hurricanes right off the rip. 4 goals in his first 4 shots. He finished with 8 goals in 19 games for the Carolina Hurricanes. He doubled his total with Nashville when he had 41 games played, 4 goals. He almost tied his point total. He had 9 points in 41 games with Nashville. He had 8 with Carolina. How about a +4, played just 12 minutes and 16 seconds on average, had a 38.1 shooting percentage. Not bad for a guy who's supposed to be your 4th line center that's really supposed to be there for the physicality and the big body. But he comes in and absolutely goes on a heater first 4 games with the Hurricanes. The first few games where he has his first 4 shots were all goals. Then he finishes with 8. So another nice addition. The thing is, he's making less than $1 million, and he's locked up for next year too. So now you got your 4th line center basically locked up. So you got Stahl as your 3, Jankowski's as your 4. They have 2 big bodies that are going to shut down a lot of guys, and Jankowski's another option for the Hurricanes where they can use him on the PK. And then they got 3 different defensive, 3 sets of forwards they want to use on the penalty kill. So yeah, it was a big move. It was a big swing to get Mikko Rantanen. Unfortunately, it didn't work in that aspect, but the Hurricanes were able to pivot. And you got to give a ton of credit to Eric Tulsky and the pro scouts for going out there and be like, hey, there's a guy that can really fit the system really well. He's built to be a Carolina Hurricane. Let's go get Logan Stankoven. I've liked this game since he was with the Texas Stars. He really did a good job when he was with, back in the WHL with Kamloops. So you bring him in, and he's fitting quite well, and now you have a potential to give him a contract. With he's going to his last year's ELC. There's going to be extensions and everything else involved too, and that's another guy you have locked up, potentially soon. So they had to make a pivot. It worked, to where they got a guy who fits the system well, and he got a lot of draft capital. So like I said, you got to give credit to all those guys, and then you extend a former MVP who played really well, just blended right into the system, good. And, and if you look at the hindsight of you just take Mika Rantanen out of it, you basically got Stankoven and Hall in like 4 or 5 draft picks for Nietzsche's, Drury, and 2 picks. One went to Colorado, one went to Chicago. All in all, if you take just Mikko out of it, not a bad return for the Carolina Hurricanes. And then you just look at the playoffs. I mean, they go to the Eastern Conference Final. Stankoven had himself a good playoff run with the Canes. Scored 5 goals, put himself in some good company with Foegele and Eric Cole, and, scoring a goal in the elimination game, joins Foegele and the late Joseph Vasicek. 5 goals, 8 points. I mean, Taylor Hall, 2 goals, 6 points. Not bad at all. I mean, you would love, Mark Jankowski, you should definitely have gotten that goal. Unfortunately, it was turned back, but he still played pretty good. He wasn't even through 7 games. So overall, being able to do what you had to do with some trades, it kind of worked out to where the Hurricanes got guys who fit the system and made to a conference final. Now, all that being said, who were the top 3 Canes performers for the whole season? Not just playoffs, but also the regular season and the postseason. Well, stick around and I'll talk about it here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, who are the top 3 performers for the Carolina Hurricanes in the 24-25 season? Well, I'll give a couple honorable mentions for some guys who did really well, but I don't think were top 3 worthy, unfortunately, but did have some good seasons overall. Got to give one to, Pyotr Kochetkov. Does the yeoman's work once again with Frederick Anderson missing in a lot of games this season. He started 47 games for the Hurricanes. How about a 27-16-3 record? Of course, the 27 wins is a career high that he's beat last year's total, where he had 24. A 2.60 goals against average. He had an 898 save and did have 2 shutouts and did pick up 3 assists this year. So not bad for Pyotr in over 2,790 minutes of total ice time, and might have picked up a few penalties here for a total of 8. But up until the LA Kings game, I think he was playing a very good season overall. I think the LA Kings game might have hit the confidence a little bit just because the fact that, he was on a good run up until that point. The Hurricanes were on a winning streak and then let in 7. But other than that, I think Pyotr Kochetkov did a great job. Obviously, didn't really see him much in the playoffs. Had a couple games really about it. I mean, Frederick Anderson was on another level for the Canes, and of course, Kochetkov once again, even going back to the 23 playoffs, was someone who was just in happenstance of just not getting the opportunities there. Got a couple of games, but overall, gotta give some honorable mentions to Pyotr. I think he did really well. Same thing for Freddie Anderson, 13-8-1, a 250 goals against, an 8.99 save percentage, and of course, had a shutout in the regular season. Of course, we all know the postseason run for Freddie. I mean, absolutely lights out in the first 2 rounds. Eastern Conference Final wasn't the greatest, but it was an overall. Can't really put a lot on him. 8-5 record in 13 games, a 202 goals against, a 9.0 save 7 percentage, and it had 2 shutouts. One against the Capitals in Game 3, and then one against the Florida Panthers, also in Game 3. It was Game 4, but hey, go figure. You got to get some shutouts. He definitely did that. So I would say the 2 honorable mentions definitely have to go to the netminders. If there's a third one you have to talk about, Shane Gostisbehere comes back, leads the defense in points, 45, 38 assists, 4 power play goals. You love to see it from him. But I think the number 3 guy, or the third star of the regular season for the Carolina Hurricanes, has to go to Jacob Slavin. I mean, are we really surprised by this guy? He had 6 goals, 21 assists for 27 points, played in 80 games, had a plus 16 on the season. Oh, and he had 2 game-winning goals. Not bad at all for Mr. Slavin, but finished with a plus 16. Not too shabby, all things considered, that in terms of the whole team. That put him tied for second with Dmitry Orlov and Jordan Martinook. And like I said earlier, third consecutive season for Slavin having 8 penalty minutes or less. I don't know why he's not up for the Lady Byng, but that's a different discussion for another time. But you look at the playoffs, I mean, Jacob Slavin, 2 goals, 2 assists for 4 points in 15 games. Did have a game-winning goal, which was an overtime in game 1 against the Capitals, but he led the team with a +10. Oh, and in those 15 games that he played, 0 penalty minutes. You're talking 80 games in the regular season, 15 in the postseason. You're talking 95 games total for Jacob Slavin between the regular season and the playoffs. 8 penalty minutes in total. And he had 0 in 15 postseason games. Not bad for Mr. Slavin for the season that he had. He is definitely the third star for the Hurricanes overall this season. Number 2 star, obviously, this is where I get to see a lot of people having a toss-up, but for me personally, I think, this is where you kind of go with it. Of course, if you have different ideas about your top 3 or maybe just even the top 2, let me know in the comments if you're on the YouTube version of it, how would you feel about number 1 and number 2? And my number 2 is Sebastian Aho. Now, he did lead the team in points with 74. He did play 79 games. He had 29 goals, 45 assists. His 45 assists did lead the team along with his points. He was a +7. He did have 5 power play goals and 3 shorthanded goals, 5 overtime goals as well, and 9 game winners. Now, you hear all that, you're like, okay, but he led the team with 45 assists, led the team in points, had power play goals, had a bunch of game winners, which also led, and 5 overtimes. What more can you ask of Sebastian Aho? And then if you look at his playoffs, 7 goals, 15 points in 15 games, was a +3, had 3 power play goals, and all of them came in round 1 against the Devils, and even had a game winner and an overtime winner that sent them to round 2. You're like, okay, so what more could have Sebastian Aho do to get the number 1 spot? That's a great season. I agree, it's a great season for Aho, but my slight caveat on that is there were definitely some times during the regular season where you're kind of like, where is Sebastian Aho? And you could maybe see it for a little bit of the playoffs too. And nothing against them. Don't get me wrong. I love Fish. He's a great player. Obviously, definitely an elite star player for the Hurricanes. I mean, every season he's always either 1 or number 2 in terms of points, assists, game winners, overtime goals, power play goals, shorties, all that good stuff. He is a great player. He's a phenomenal player. However, there are some times, like I said, where you're kind of like, I would like to see a little bit more of you. And you can even see that for the Eastern Conference Final, where, he had some, he got, game 4 and game 5. Game 5 was his greatest game. He had 2 goals. Game 4 was pretty good, too. He has also had a goal there, too. So he did finish with 3 goals in the last 2 games of the playoffs for the Hurricanes in game 4 and game 5. And that gave him his 7 was those last 3 goals in those 2 games. But then now I know what the question is. Okay, well, who's number 1, and why did this guy have a better overall season than maybe Sebastian Aho? And for me, it's the guy who was voted as the team MVP of the regular season by the Carolina, Raleigh chapter of the Professional Hockey Writers Association, and that's Seth Jarvis. Seth Jarvis, in 73 games played, and this is the craziest part, he had 67 points, which tied his total from the season before, and he did that in fewer games than he did last year. He only missed 1 game because of due to rest. You're talking 8 fewer games. He missed 7 because of re-aggravating his shoulder and still tied his point total. How about for the fact that he had to set a career high in 35 assists? If he was actually available for those 7 other games, he could have easily had 40 assists and well over 70 points. And here's the kicker. He has a +12 on the regular season. That's pretty good for him. That put him 7th on the team. How about for the fact that, he was second on the team in power play goals with 7 behind Andrei Svechnikov. He led the team with shorties with 5, which was tied with Sam Reinhart. He did have 2 game winners, but it wasn't, the typical, Aho with having 9. Seth didn't really have overtime goals. Here's the thing, though. He led the team in goals with 32. That's very huge for a guy who played 6 fewer games than his teammate in Sebastian Aho and still beat him in goals and had the opportunity to potentially pass him in points. But if he didn't miss all those games, I could definitely see where Jarvis might have done it. Then you go look in the playoffs, and I asked Rod Brandamore this of just, looking at Jarvis and where his senior season, his 4th year in the league, to take that next step to go from where he was at with just now going up there with the goals and the assists and the points in the regular season, and then his performance in the playoffs. How about in 15 games, 6 goals, which put him, 3rd in the goal race with, Andrei Svechnikov and Sebastian Aho, but he led the team with 10 assists. The only guy that hit double digits, 16 points, was a +2, 2 power play goals. And he only had 6 penalty minutes, and he was a +2. Led the team in points, only 1 more than Sebastian Aho, but had 2 more assists. It was 3rd on the team in goals. That's pretty impressive for Seth Jarvis to be able to do that. And even in the regular season, playing 2nd line and 3rd line and 1st line minutes throughout the season. Rod Brandamore uses Seth Jarvis as a line spark plug, and it shows. Any lane he's on, that line instantly goes, especially the Jordans. And I think when just how great he was in the playoffs, too, I mean, he got a point in every single game of that series. He got a goal in Game 5. He picked up assists throughout the rest of the other 4 games. What more can you ask out of Seth Jarvis? He made an impact in every single game. He was over a point per game guy, was a representative of the 4 nations, and even after some people questioned it. And for Seth, it's just, for me, he is that Swiss Army knife for Rod Brandamore. His all-around game, I think, is just that much more noticeable. Like I said, 5 shorties, got power play goals. He's someone that Rod uses in every facet of offensive, neutral, and defensive zones. He throws them out there for faceoffs too when they really need it. And he's noticeable every single game. I don't think there's any game all season where you're like, where's Seth Jarvis? That's how much of a gamer he is. And Andrei Svechnikov's even said it too, that he is a gamer. And I think that's where, and he also mentioned that about Blake too, but everyone knows that Seth is just an absolute, he's a rinker at. And it's just his personality is top class. I mean, everyone's got good personalities on the team, but just Jarvis is a magnet. He's just someone who needs a quote machine. He is a guy who, like I said, every single night you notice Seth Jarvis. There's no where is he at type of feel. Like I said, nothing against Aho, but it's just Jarvis just makes it. I think he makes a more noticeable impact. And, there's the talk of all the Hurricanes don't have a superstar. They have some elite players. They have some elite stars, but they don't have that superstar. They don't have the elite superstar. Maybe not the elite superstar part, but I think there is a superstar on this team, and I think that is Seth Jarvis. What more can you ask out of a guy who led the team in goals in the regular season and then decided to go, go and lead the team in assists with 10, the only guy to get double digits, and lead the team in points, to be the only over point per game guy? Yeah, Aho was a point per game player, but Seth was over a point per game. Yeah, it's 1, but hey, a point over is a point over. And the fact that he led in shorthanded goals as well, there's just so much of Seth Jarvis dynamic that it's like, yeah. And like I said, I could be wrong. You guys might think, people in the comment section might say, hey, Sebastian Aho's the number 1 guy from the regular season or the whole, 24-25 season as a whole. And Seth is too. If you feel that way, let me know in the comments. Do you think Aho's 1? Do you think Jarvis is 2? Do you think someone else should be in the top 3? Or do you agree that, it is Seth Jarvis number 1 than Aho 2? But, if you're on YouTube, let me know in the comments, or, you can definitely hit me up on X and, let me know what you think. Who would your top 3 be? But for me, if we're talking top 3 Canes performers from regular season and the playoffs, Jacob Slavin number 3, Sebastian Aho number 2, and Seth Jarvis number 1. So That's kind of the reflections on the whole 24-25 season, looking at the trades that kind of led to the roster being shaken up again, which led him to a long playoff run. And, with some honorable mentions of guys who were top performers. And, of course, my top three of Slavin, Aho, and Jarvis kind of being those guys in the regular season and in the postseason. And that's kind of all she wrote for 24-25. Now it's just waiting for exit interviews, talk about those for a little bit, and now start to take a look at the draft that's in a few weeks. Carolina Hurricanes are picking 29th. And then, as we get ever so much closer, start talking about free agency and the re-sign phase, because there's going to be a lot that the Hurricanes are going to be doing this offseason, but that's for a future episode in the near future. But until then, guys, this will be a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first. Check out Locked on AHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find AHL Game Night on Locked on AHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep it with me, I'm at OneShoeZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where you can click my link trees to check out all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. I have been very busy this month, and a lot more content coming your way very, very soon. If you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked on Hurricanes, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, well, it's Locked on Hurricanes. Subscribe. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up. Tell me know if you like the show as well. Share with our other Caniacs who become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Enjoy your weekend. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.